If you're an assurance pro, you already know that sustainability reporting is moving at lightning speed. And with the arrival of ISSA 5000, the game has really changed. So today, we're going to cut through all the noise and focus on what matters most in the field. The biggest execution challenges this new standard throws at us. We're talking evidence, we're talking value chains, and we're talking group engagements. So let's get right into it.
All right, here's our roadmap. First, we'll quickly touch on the why behind this new standard. Then we'll dive deep into 3 of the toughest practical hurdles out there, nailing down assurance for the value chain, figuring out how to leverage the work of others, and executing those tricky group engagements. And to finish up, we'll boil it all down to the core principles you really need to know. Let's get started. So first things first, why do we even have ISA 50000? Well, think about it. The world is demanding sustainability information it can actually trust. There was a huge need for a single global standard. The whole point was to avoid a messy, fractured system and instead create a common language for top-notch assurance. And this quote from the IASB really gets to the heart of it. The words you want to focus on here are consistent, high quality, and the big one, enhancing confidence. This isn't just about checking boxes, right? It's about building real global trust in this information. This is the why that drives every single requirement we're about to talk about. Okay, on to our first major execution challenge, the value chain. As you know, a company's sustainability story doesn't just stop at its own front door. It goes way down into its supply chain and all the way out to its customers. And for us practitioners, that creates a massive headache when it comes to gathering evidence. I mean, this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? When the data is coming from suppliers, partners, or other third parties, people you have no direct control over, how on earth do you get comfortable with that information? How do you get that sufficient, appropriate evidence? This is one of the biggest practical problems ISF 5000 was designed to tackle head-on. And, the standard is actually pretty upfront about these hurdles. The ISAB admits that access can be limited, that evaluating external data is tough, and hey, that management itself has a hard time getting a complete picture. But here's the kicker. Look at that last point. It's the key. Despite all these very real challenges, our fundamental job doesn't change. We still have to get sufficient, appropriate evidence. There are no shortcuts here, just a clear path forward. So what's the game plan? Well, ISA 5000 gives us a very clear 3-step approach. Step 1. You test management's process. You can't just take their numbers. You have to dig into how they got them. Step 2. You look at any relief provisions. Sometimes, frameworks let companies use estimates or sector data when direct info just isn't available. Your job is to make sure they used those provisions correctly. And finally, step 3, and this is so important, you have to design your own procedures to get the evidence you need. At the end of the day, the responsibility is on us. That whole idea of getting evidence, especially from the value chain, naturally brings us to our next topic. Because let's be real, we're not going to be doing this alone. We're going to have to leverage the work of others. But ISA 50000 is super specific about who those others can be and what rules you have to play by. Let's start with a really important definition you need to know: another practitioner. Now pay very close attention to that last part. The single defining factor is whether the engagement leader is able to be sufficiently and appropriately involved in their work. That right there is the bright line. If you can't direct, supervise, and review their work like they're one of your own, then they are another practitioner and a whole different set of rules kicks in. This table breaks it down perfectly. An engagement team member? Simple. They're on your team, under your direct supervision. A practitioner's expert? Think of a carbon engineer or a human rights specialist. They bring skills you don't have. They aren't on your team, but you're still responsible for evaluating their work. But another practitioner? They're in a category all their own. And it all comes back to that one key phrase: you're unable to be sufficiently involved. That changes everything.
Now, this is where things get really interesting and, frankly, pretty smart. The IASB knew it would be a nightmare to get separate assurance from every single partner in a value chain. So they built in this idea of a one-to-many report. Think of it like this. A major supplier gets their sustainability data assured once, and then they can hand that single report to all of their customers. This could be a total game changer for efficiency, and it's baked right into the standard.
But, and this is a big but, you can't just take that one-to-many report and call it a day. You still have a job to do. You have to decide if that report gives you the specific evidence you need for your engagement. That means you've got to check out the other practitioner's competence and independence. You need to understand the work they did, and, this is crucial, you have to see if there are any complementary controls needed back at your own client to make that report truly reliable. It's a fantastic tool, but you still have to be skeptical and do your homework.
All right, this brings us to our third major execution area, group engagements. And look, this isn't some niche topic we can put off learning about. In a lot of places, the very first companies that need mandatory assurance are going to be huge, complex groups. This is a day one problem.
Yeah, the standard itself basically says, get ready, because group engagements are going to be the norm, not the exception, right out of the gate. So what does that mean for us? It means understanding how to plan, coordinate, and execute assurance over consolidated reporting isn't a nice-to-have skill. It's an absolute necessity, right now.
Okay, now here's where we need to pay close attention, because there's a really important distinction inside a group engagement. A component practitioner works on a subsidiary, and the assumption is that you, the group leader, are sufficiently involved with them. They're part of your grand plan. But what if that subsidiary had its own assurance engagement done by a totally different firm, and you had no involvement? Well, in that case, you treat them just like we discussed, as another practitioner. It all comes back to that one critical concept, your level of involvement.
So if you're the group engagement leader, the buck really stops with you. Your responsibilities are huge. You've got to develop the entire strategy. You have to identify all the key components, not just in the group, but in its value chain too. You're also explicitly on the hook for making sure everyone is communicating properly. And maybe the most important part, you have to specifically design procedures to tackle the risks that only exist because you're rolling up or aggregating all this information. That's a big one.
Whew, okay. We've gone through a lot of the nitty-gritty, the value chain, using the work of others, group engagements. So now, let's just pull it all together into 5 core principles that really define what it means to do this work under ISSA 5000. So, what's the big picture here? What does this new mindset really look like? First, that concept of sufficient involvement is everything. It dictates all the rules. Second, getting sufficient, appropriate evidence is non-negotiable. It doesn't matter where the info comes from. Third, group engagements need a proactive, central strategy from day one. Fourth, communication isn't just a nice idea anymore, it's a hard requirement. And finally, you have to anticipate change. This standard was built to grow and evolve, which is pretty cool.
So I'll leave you with this question for you and your firm. Getting good at ISSA 5000 isn't just about learning a new rulebook. It's about completely rethinking how you execute an engagement. It's going to demand way more strategic planning, new ways of looking at external evidence, and a deep understanding of these rules for working with others. So the real question isn't if this is going to change your firm's approach, but how you're going to adapt to lead the way in this new world of assurance.